That's right. Very- Right now, everybody's at lunch, yeah. Yeah.
somewhat Army Marine Corps centric because of the whole multi-domain battle concept. However, we've actually gotten that comment from some of our leadership too, that it would not be a bad idea to make it a little bit more joint. And if we can get a good dynamic Air Force paper, I would definitely not turn them down.
That's fine. I just wanted to ask you that before I went out, and I asked. Now I can't guarantee you.
No, of course not.
I'll be happy to try and
Yeah.
make the connection.
Sure,
See if we can
sure.
get somebody engaged.
That's fantastic.
Outstanding.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, and definitely, if you know Mike, he's a great POC to get into our organization.
Oh yeah, I've known Mike for years.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Oh, yes. I'm supposed to carry the camera back, right? Is that the deal? No, it's quite all right.
So you're gonna be here tomorrow though?
I'm gonna be here tomorrow, but I have to leave probably around 10:30.
Yep, I can give you the camera like, I will give it to you right after this, but I want to put it in a plastic bag, so
Sure.
I don't feel like it's just exposed.
Okay.
But I can give it to you first thing in the morning if you can't.
Yeah, that's
get
perfect.
around.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay.
I can just throw it right in the carry-on.
Okay, yep, I'm just gonna put it in a plastic, Ziploc, so it's not gonna be fancy, but and it's not a big bag.
All right. I just don't want to break it. It doesn't have like a protective cover or anything like that?
Well, it has lens covers.
All right, good.
I didn't bring the big book bag that
All right, I got
carries
you.
in just because it's too much to carry
I
around.
understand.
At these types of events, and it's already
All right.
which is as it should, I should say. It's a very old camera. With that said, so I didn't know can I take this in here of you or no?
Yeah, I don't have my badge on.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine.
No, this is distro A, everything.
Wonderful. Okay, and then okay, great. Then I'll move that.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I'll be taking notes and quotes so that I can send it to you.
Very good.
All right.
All right, great.
This starts at 13:30.
13:30.
Yeah, some of the other sessions are starting at 13:50.
Yeah.
All right, see ya.
I've had a few people in the hallway tell me they're coming, but
Yeah, I've had several people.
I was looking at the agenda. I'm like, man, you got Mr. Woodsy doing
Yeah,
his
he's
thing,
doing the ARCO stuff
and then
down
you
here.
got the women panel. Like, might as well put me up against a freaking bag of puppies. What the hell?
What you need, though, is you need a bag of treats or some type
I
of
need-
gifts or
I need
whatever,
something.
iPod, you're giving away free
Yeah.
iPhone or something like that. And then you can, you're all set up, just with your video.
Yeah,
Everything's
the gentleman from the AV department was fantastic. So I'm all mic'd up, ready to go.
All mic'd up, ready
I
to
got
go.
the pointer thing, so
You're in control, so.
we are good to go. What we don't do is we don't get to user. That's really where the line stops, right? We don't decrypt, we don't get to user, but anything else below that should be absolutely fair game.
If I can do the gear radio, my pitch tower
Yeah.
software radio, and do it on my own and my Garage, my kitchen table.
The protocol stack below the application layer should be completely fair game. Here's where it gets sticky, right? It gets tricky when because it's all about your intent, right? It's all about are you doing it for target or are you doing it for endpoint, right? Well, I can say, well, right now I'm doing it for target, but if I store that data over time, I may be able to discern some interesting patterns.
Exactly.
Now all of a sudden, what? Oh, magically it turned classified on me, right? You know.
So we're doing that's the exact thing we're doing next with our situational awareness and getting to pattern of what does the normal RF look like?
Right.
And looking for patterns
Right.
that
So you can do that even without the modulator. You can do that just at the physical layer, right? So are you doing Intel now? Right. So
we're
I'm telling
talking
you.
Crowdsourcing
I know.
afterwards. You just got yeah, you got to talk to the Intel
Yeah.
guys because who would want to know?
Right.
Oh, by the way, cell phone traffic just dropped 80%.
Right.
You know, that seems like it'd be useful to somebody.
Yeah, that could be great BDA too, right?
Either one, right?
Yeah.
What I was thinking is more.
No, but I agree.
All the locals have left.
Or somebody's doing something bad to the cellular network, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So have we talked to integrated avenues before about this? Who are the right people to talk
So
to?
for spectrum management, the lead is SNPCD. I don't know who you know from that organization, but they're. So I can make intros for you.
Okay.
Let me give you my card. Yeah, no problem. I can link you up to the right folks.
One thing I've been trying to figure out is like doing this, when I'm doing all this R&D internal work, this counterintelligence market is really applicable to the more tactical market. Where you start running into is okay, how would they use it?
Right.
What do you have to talk to? Because you're not going to give anybody a known stovepipe system, so you know you have to work with data somebody else. Those things are hard when you're a 35-person company.
Spectrum management is a big focus of CyberBlitz, right?
Okay.
Because one of the key problems that the user community has noticed is the first thing that the SIX does when the radio communications goes down is he has this fantastic checklist of is this on, is this on, is this not on, right? But the last thing on the list is am I being jammed?
Really?
The assumption is that something broke, right? That is, because we never had an adversary that could really do it, right? So they don't get to, oh hell, maybe I should check if somebody's jamming me by putting on threat now until like step 27, you know?
Which is crazy, right? Because so one thing
You would think an alert would pop up, the noise would just jump, it's not that difficult to do, right?
Well, just look, like, see, Jane, you retired Army, USEC, and taking these off to some of those guys, as you know, and he said, it's coming out here, guys jump in, and their entire version of spectrum memory, they're like, where'd the intel reports stop? There's no way to actually know if the ground, if it's the same thing that the intel report says. And then, yeah, and this was crazy, it's really kind of, they're running our system for management over culture. And all of a sudden, the trace where mesh network goes down, and nobody's got connectivity, right? Works great around the base. Sure. The tip, where most of the radios are goes down. Somebody set up a 1.7 wireless camera.
Oh, there you go.
Stepped on everybody.
Stepped on everybody, yeah.
Just look at the spectrum. There's somebody stepping on it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But they have no visibility on it.
Right.
You can't see it, right? So yeah, this is a known problem that they're trying to figure out how to do.
Do you have like 30 minutes when you got to get on into the demo next 2 days?
I don't know.
You're quite packed.
Yeah, I'm leaving pretty early tomorrow morning. And honestly, I'm not the guy you have to convince. I'm already on the ship, right? And like I said, and honestly, most of my guys are already on the ship. What we need to do is figure out, well, first you have to prove that whatever it is, it works and is useful. But then we got to figure out how would it integrate into somebody's mission kit, right? Who would the PM be? Who would, how would they use it, right? That's really where a lot of the solutions, that's the problem we have. It's not that the solution doesn't exist, but we don't know how to integrate it into the core
And
structure.
that's why most like cyberpunk might be the same way. That's really useful. Here's just my contacts. Here's
Exactly.
Take
No,
your
CyberBlitz is
computer,
going to, we got the 25th AD there, so it's a great opportunity to put it right in the hands of soldiers to see how they would use it.
All right. So yeah, so I can hit you up and say, hey,
Yeah, hit me up and I'll link you up to the right people and see what we can do, right? I can't make any promises.
Of course.
It's pretty late because it's happening in September, but we'll
Okay.
you know, who knows?
So, now is this one, how often do they?
They're going to do it every year.
Every year, okay.
Yeah, it's every year. Every year. The date unfortunately seems to change from year to year because this is only the second year we're doing it, right? So it's totally new. But it's going to be an annual thing.
Okay, all right, yeah, so I'll hit you up just to, you'll bring in the.
Yeah.
And then maybe get in, how you doing? Okay.
Very good.
All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
No problem at all. See how many people show up for this thing. Yeah. It's very relative. Very relative.
Here's your operating now.
Technical perspective. Ah, all right.
Technically, I'm a member out of Aberdeen, but I moved out to First Atlas. Worked out that way, the first chapter, going to Aberdeen.
Well, when we bragged down, they wanted to put us in the Chesapeake chapter, but nobody wanted that because I'm like, no, meat is going to own it. Nobody's going to want to travel down there, so they finally granted us.
West, right? Looking forward to some soon. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully it should be fun. I try to keep it entertaining as much as I can.
afternoon, everyone. My name is George Bertoli. I am giving this talk today. I want to thank you all who chose me over the other competing speakers. I was looking at the agenda. I'm like, this is going to be tough. I got Mr. Wiltsey doing his thing. Oh, you couldn't do it over lunch. You have to do it over my brief. And then, of course, you got the all-women's panel, which is a draw. Might as well just have a box of puppies right outside and see what happens. So, this talk, it's a pretty high-level talk, hopefully somewhat entertaining for you. Really just discussing what we call cyber going to look like in the next 20 or so years. And take that with a grain of salt. I'll make sure I mention that. And what are really the big technologies that I see, and this is just me, as things that we probably need to worry about going forward. So step one, let's talk multi-domain battle real fast from my point of view. This is absolutely not doctrinal, right? But this is the way I see it. And this is not my picture. I actually got this from Army Cyber Command way back when. This is dated. But I still use it all the time. It's a great little cartoon. But basically, right, you have the physical space, right, where we do our kinetic fight. And now you have this new layer on top of that, which is the virtual space, where we do whatever we want to do on cyber side, right? And the two are not disjoint, right? There's coupling there, of course, because they kind of coexist. So if you look at that, there are things we want to be able to do, right? There are things that if there's a emitter on the ground, we would love to know what its projection is within the cyber domain so that I could perhaps engage it there as opposed to here. And vice versa. If I engage something in virtual space, what exactly are the repercussions within the physical space? That's what we want to know. Unfortunately, there's lots of things that get in our way. Right? For the electrical engineers in the room, I do not have a fast-forward transform for you to give you that mapping automatically. As a matter of fact, the domain actually has lots of stuff that kind of almost intentionally gets in the way from you doing that. And usually when I use this slide to do all my briefings, I use it as a stepping point to how we're going to overcome or try to overcome some of these barriers. We're not going to do that today. Today I'm just going to talk to you about these barriers in themselves and how they're going to evolve over time. Because unfortunately, they're not fixed lines in the sand, right? These are constantly moving, evolving things. So let's get started. So step one, before we go to the future, let's look at the past. This is one of my favorite charts. It's my History Z chart. This is the entire history of the internet in one chart, right? So I like to say three things about this chart. The first thing I like to say about this chart is, one, cyberspace as we know it is not that old. I say this with conviction because I'm not that old, and I have DOSed, right? So it can possibly be that old. Over time, it kind of grew slowly. Eventually, we got to AOL. Modems, who remembers this? Who doesn't remember that? If you're in this room and you don't remember that, don't ask any questions through this whole session. Right? Eventually, you got to 1995. 1995, Google. This is where I say the internet was born. Everything before that was postpartum, prenatal incubation. Right? Here's when the internet was born. This is where it came to the masses. I like to date my children by this. Right? So my son was born in 2009, so he's 9 after Google. Right? This makes a huge difference, right? This new generation after 1995, what we call the digital natives, takes a lot of stuff for granted, primarily information, right? My son, I had to wait for him to learn how to read. My daughter, she's 14 after Google. The moment she could speak, she could fact check me in real time, right? Like, Dad, Italy did not invent the ocean, right? Who are you going to believe, me or Siri? Right? And you take the iPad away and you send them to clean their room. Right? But that is the trend. And now, the second thing I like to say, right, is that if you notice the Z map, right, this pace of change has increased and is continuing to increase exponentially. Engineers love the world exponentially. We get to use log scale. It's fantastic. Right? But it's true, right? And you can actually see it on the timeline. You can see it. If you look at the blue, the processing power of the current supercomputers, you'll notice how China's kicking our butt so far, right? That has grown exponentially. If you look at adoption rates, what took Facebook a decade to do, reach 1 billion user, took WhatsApp just 5 years, right? And then if you look at 2016, lots of amazing things happened in 2016. None of them political. I'm not talking about politics at all today, right? But look, we had the first landing, if everybody saw the video of the SpaceX landing back on the floating platform, that was amazing, right? AlphaGo, right, that was a huge thing, right? He beat the world champion Go player, something that just 5 years ago we thought was impossible in AI. The first 8K TV broadcast was sent out from the Brazil Olympics. Nobody saw it because nobody's got an 8K TV, but it was sent out, right? And Amazon Prime, Air Prime, the first ever package was delivered by Amazon Air Prime in London. So amazing stuff. And it's only going to keep speeding up. And then, once again, this brings me back to my whole point, right? My last point is, as we start going into the future of this briefing, don't believe a word I say. Because if somebody asked me in 1980 to predict this, there's no possible way I would have gotten it right? So chances are whatever I tell you is going to be wrong, but hopefully it's in the right general direction. So step one, there are things we can be confident with. And history has proven that we are pretty stable in making projections of how technology in general is going to go. So for example, trend lines. Let's just talk about size, right? So the internet today, in terms of the number of things, is probably around anywhere between 10 and 12 billion things connected to it, right? By all projection estimates out there, if growth rate continues as historically was done, the number should be somewhere around 9.5 billion. It's actually supposed to be 160, 600 billion devices connected by 2040, 2050, right? So that's a 2-order of magnitude increase in the next 30 years. That's a huge number of things, right? It actually averages out to be right around 70 connected devices per human being, right? Now that sounds like a lot, but believe it or not right now because you have to listen to me, but in the next session, do a little mental exercise, if you will, of all the stuff that's in your house that already is connected to the internet, right? If I do it, right, you start counting your TVs, your DVRs, your personal devices, your iPads, my treadmill's connected. The next thing you know, you're in the 40s already, right? And it's only 2017, right? Adoption rates have been growing steadily as well. I know this chart is hard to read, but the point is, I blew it up for you. If you look at just the average world penetration rate of the internet, right, it's been growing steadily. Every year or so, about 4%. And once again, another milestone. In 2016, half the globe is now internet connected. We can do the same thing with more technical things, right? This is Moore's law in one picture, right? The amount of processing power goes up exponentially over time. No, exponentially, notice log scale. It's fantastic, right? So that's historical, right? Nice linear straight line. You can project it out, right? So are you an optimist? Do you believe Moore's law is going to keep going for a while? Are you a pessimist? Do you think it's going to taper off? Regardless, somewhere around 2030, somewhere here, right, you're talking still a 2-order magnitude increase in whatever device you have in your pocket today, right? So imagine your phone 100 times more powerful than it is today. And that's only, what, 15, 20 years from now, right? Once again, phone penetration rates. How many people are going to own a smartphone, right? You can project it out. This is today, right? We're about 20 to 25% of the population. If you look at population growth versus distribution, once again, somewhere in here, right? And of course, it's going to peter out, right? There's always going to be that one Eskimo that doesn't have a phone, or that one relative you have that thinks the government is out to get him or something. But basically, you're looking at 100% market adoption rate by somewhere in the 2030s, late 2030s, somewhere in there. Everybody, right? So what does all this mean? So this means that you're going to be operating in an environment where you're going to have these constant increasing complexity, density, diversity, and also, by the way, this is somewhat counterintuitive, you're also going to have shrinking power levels, right? To add all those users within a finite space, the way to do it is to increase frequency use, and by doing that, you have to decrease the cell sizes. They keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So from a EW cyber SIGINT perspective, this is a huge problem, right? You have this huge, dense, low power area, and you might have to be at a standoff to look into all that. How do we deal with that? Here's another interesting trend that you may not have considered, too. there was a time where things were built for one specific purpose and one specific purpose only. A camera was a camera, a DVR was a DVR, a TV was a TV. As processing power increased, as manufacturing processes improved, this has all changed, right? So all of a sudden, you see commodity devices now subsuming all the functionality in one, right? Nobody owns a camera anymore. Who owns a digital camera? Unless you're a photographer. Nobody does. Everybody uses their phone. Most people are now using their entertainment, their gaming center as their home video entertainment center as well, right? So Xbox One famously said, we want to be the hub of your house, and so on and so forth. So now all of a sudden, you're in this place where the hardware is basically commodity, and what dictates its function is purely the software that's on it, right? The software really makes that device do whatever it can do or you can imagine it to do. And nothing is more exemplary of this than your phone, right? These are just numbers. These are actually data. They're from July 2016. So, and this is just iPhones. I'm not even talking Google Android, right? So the iOS App Store, as of July 16, had over 2.5 million apps in it. And those apps were loaded over 140 billion times, right? And these are, and not all of them are trivial, right? Only about 20% of them are, games and Angry Birds, right? The rest are, some are, I'm going to turn your phone into a flashlight, and some are complicated medical diagnostic devices. It's pretty amazing what you can do with that same commodity hardware. So, here's though where it gets problematic. So, I told you that it's hard to predict the future. This is why. It's not because of the device. We can predict that the next iPhone is going to be 100 times more powerful and they can have all this bandwidth. The question is, what applications does that enable? That's the part that's hard to predict. It's the application layer stuff. And let me give you a couple of examples that I got completely wrong. Twitter. When it first came out, I was absolutely certain it was going to go nowhere. Right? It was texting on the web with an artificial 144-character limit for no reason whatsoever. Who the heck was going to use this thing? And, well, populations have been overthrown with this device, right? So its popularity was a surprise, at least to me anyway. Now, to be fair, they still have not made any money at all, right? They've still lost like $2 billion. But they're still alive somehow. Here's another one. Crowdsourcing, right? The constant availability of information has made this whole new industry come up, which is amazing, right? So, and we use it for everything. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with these, but so DARPA actually, way back in 2009, wanted to do an experiment to show how crowdsourcing can be, I'm going to call it operationalized for intelligence purposes. But basically what they did is they released 10 red weather balloons throughout the country, and they announced it ahead of time, and they had teams form, and the idea was whoever can find the 10 balloons first in their exact grid location was going to win some money, right? And they were prepared. They were there prepared for like a whole week to put the balloon up and take it down at night and go on and keep going, and within 10 hours, the game was over. 10 hours. It took MIT 10 hours to win that game, right? And they did it basically the Amway Ponzi scheme way, right? They basically said, hey, if you find it, I'll share the prize with you. And if you get somebody to find it, I'll share the prize with you and the person you recruited, and so on and so forth. So it's a giant pyramid scheme, but it worked. And by the way, they weren't alone. The teams that came in 2nd through 9th finished in like 11 hours, right? It wasn't far off. The State Department, not to be outdone, did another game similar to it in 2012. This was global, though. This was 5 global cities throughout the globe, so you couldn't just rely on English speaking. And it was much more difficult because they actually had people with green shirts running around the city, and you had to find that person with the green shirt. And once again, in 24 hours, the winning team found 3 out of the 5 people. Right? So, like I said, we use it for everything. Capital, right? Crowdfunding. Reputation, think Yelp. Situational awareness, I gave you 2 examples. Think Waze, too, right? Software development, we all know that. Services, Uber. And knowledge, one of my favorite, Wikipedia. Right? I still own an Encyclopedia Britannica. Once in a while, when I get specifically nostalgic, I open the hermetic seal on the cabinet. I will pick a volume at random and peruse it. Right? Meanwhile, the kids are just staring at me like I'm an animal, gnawing a bone. Like they call their mother, "Mom, Dad's being weird again. You better hurry. He's got the XYZ volume. He's going crazy." So we're not going to let that stop us, though. Let's predict the future now. We've built it all up. So this is what I got for you. Notice it's sparse. If you have some ideas, I'll be happy to add them to the chart for you. Right? So there are some things that have happened already. Memristors, ReRAM, that's out. That's actually available today. It's not widestream yet. It's not fully capable yet, but it's out. That holds some interesting promise. Right? So this is the promise of the never losing state memory in your computer, right? Instant boot. Li-Fi, if you're familiar with that, that's the idea that your LED light bulbs are going to become your new network within your house. Google, Rosie the Robot, you guys remember that one? I'm going to say that's going to happen somewhere there. Automotive technology, cars, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. The technology, believe it or not, is ready today. Cars today, autonomous vehicles today, are safer drivers than humans. The only thing stopping them from going on the road is our legal framework, and drivers like myself would never take our hands off the wheel, but they're actually better drivers than we are already. And so on and so forth. Let's see. Human augmented brain performance kind of stuff, quantum computers 2040, artificial intelligence, and by this I really mean, artificial intelligence, not what we have today. And it doesn't really matter here because we're all going to die Terminator style anyway. So I don't have time, obviously, to talk to you about all of these. So I picked 3 that are my favorite, which I think are going to be truly the one. Actually, maybe I picked 4, 3 that I think really are the ones we got to talk about. All right. So step 1, user interfaces. The mouse, believe it or not, has been around for over 50 years. It was invented in the late 60s. It was introduced as a commercial product by Apple in 1973 with the Lisa. And it's still with us today. It's unbelievable how in the world of technology, considering everything I just told you, we still have a mouse. Now, that's probably going to change. It may not go away entirely, but there are lots of other interfaces coming out today that are looking to push it out of the way. From simple things like tracking your eye movement, obviously virtual and augmented reality is there. Brain-machine interfaces, they're probably a ways off, but there's actually an awesome video on YouTube of a guy, not a pilot, getting into a Cessna with one of these things on that's connected to the controls of the plane, and he was actually able to have the plane bank and fly, even though he was not a pilot at all, just by thinking about turn left, turn right. He didn't land it, but at least he was able to turn. Right? And then, of course, you got the Minority Report type interface, which you may think is far off, right? But believe it or not, it's not. So G-Speak actually has a prototype. This company is actually, the guy that runs this company is actually the same guy that consulted for the movie. And he actually has a system that is eerily similar to it, right? And then, my absolute favorite, the voice recognition systems. These are all the big ones, right? They're all out now. You got Amazon Echo, Google Assist, Home iPod. And it's not really about the device. It's about the voice recognition software that's on there, right? Now, have you guys seen the commercials, right? There's one of my favorites. I think it's an Amazon one, but where the dad is reading a story to his little daughter, and there's like, here's a whale, and she's like, how big is a whale? And he goes, Alexa, how big is a whale? And it tells him, and like, Dad, what does a whale sound like? And he goes, Alexa, what does a whale sound like? And the sound of the whale comes out. That's what the commercial does, right? This is reality.
Bobby, can you talk to play wheel?
You want to hear a station for porn detected, porno ringtone, hot chick, amateur girl, quality, sexy.
No. I had to stop it because Alexa goes crazy after that. Do not watch this at work, right? So we still have some work to do, right? We still have some work to do. Right? But it is coming. It's gotten a lot better. Right? Also, we don't have anybody from HP or Microsoft in here by chance, do we? We don't. They won't hide. So this is their version, right? So it looks normal until you look at it from the top, and then you get that. I don't know who designed this, but they really should rethink it, right? It's like, Cortana, can you help me? No, Dave, I cannot do that. If the only thing differentiating your device with the most iconic evil robot of all is the color of an LED, you probably should rethink your design. This does not do anything to quell the Earth is going to die Terminator-style invasion. Right? IoT. You cannot have a discussion about the future of the internet without talking about IoT. Now, I will be the first to tell you that everybody's familiar with the hype cycle, right? You go inflated expectation, and then you crash and burn into despair, and then eventually you get to productivity. So we are at the pinnacle of inflated expectations. And then when we got there, it wasn't high enough, so we got on a ladder and we stood on top of it, right? Because obviously the promise will far exceed what eventually will be. However, it is undeniable the potential, right? Especially with services like infrastructure, right? That's probably really where it's truly going to take hold and start. Here, in the commercial sector, you'll notice the goal. 99% of the physical things in the world are not connected. There's an objective for you. Let's connect them, right? Every single chair in this entire building should be connected to the cloud so that I can check in real time the size of my audience compared to my other people. And I can either feel good or bad about myself, one or the other. Right? But the numbers are staggering. I mean, look, there are 50 billion door locks that could be enabled, right? 42 billion sockets, refrigerators. With those numbers, clearly, there's a huge market. And the price to entry is incredibly cheap. It is amazing what you can do with a Raspberry Pi and an Arduino board, right? Some guy in the garage could be the next billionaire bought by Google, right? So, of course, everybody's going to play, right? And there are fantastic inventions out there, such as this. Look, who doesn't want to know how many eggs they have in their refrigerator right this very second? I want to know, right? Maybe you forgot to feed your dog. This lets you do it remotely for whatever reason, right? What about your kid? He might be wet right this very second, right? The smart diaper will tell you exactly when he's wet. Oh, and by the way, it'll actually tell you whether maybe he's dehydrated or not, right? And then my all-time favorite here, because, you know, when your keg is empty, that's a problem. It's a serious problem. You should know when that happens, right? But my all-time favorite is this one, right? And I am not being facetious. I think this could be a billion-dollar idea, right? So this is basically a plant monitoring system, right? So this is Hazel, the basil plant, right? You put a sensor next to basil, and it basically tells you the aridity of the soil so that you know when you have to water basil, right? And it actually, if the basil is outside, it actually even has an actuator where you can actually turn on the water, right? Now, the only problem I have with this invention is it's way too professional. Nobody wants a list of plants that they have to monitor. They want the plant to talk to them, right? So we should be able to give these things like personality, right? You could have like Yoda the eucalyptus, right? You can have a weeping willow, and he could be like the ultimate Debbie Downer, right? So imagine you're sitting here listening to me, and your weeping willow talks to you and is like, hey, what a beautiful sunny day. Too bad your short human lifespan will not let you enjoy that. Many of them. P.S. I'm thirsty. Right? That is entertainment that people will pay millions for. That's a $1 million idea, trademark. All right, and last but not least, robotics. And this is where it really does get serious, right? And by robotics, I mean this really in the generalist of terms. I'm talking artificial intelligence, I'm talking vehicles, I'm talking humanoids. Now, clearly, we are not here. This is going to be our overlord eventually, right? We're not there. And most people, when they think robotics, they think of this, right? They think of, the Roomba. It's been around for a long time. It's actually pretty capable. Horrible vacuum cleaner, fantastic little thing driving around your house, right? You think of, obviously, drones, toys, right? Or even, of course, factory automations, right? That's what people think. And if you think that, if you limit yourself to that, you might limit yourself to things like this. This is RoboCup. Now, there's actually a RoboCup 2017. Unfortunately, it was happening like last month, so I didn't get a chance to do it. But this is RoboCup 2016. If you're not familiar with RoboCup, this is nonprofit organization. Their whole objective is to field a team in 2050 of robots that can beat the world soccer champion, 2050, right? So I'm going to show you a video of their latest outtakes from 2016, and then we can agree or disagree whether or not this is actually going to happen, right? So here it goes.
Yes, he's going for it. Yes, it's there. It's there. It's there.
You got it in.
It's in. Bang. 1-0. Fancy footwork. He's on the way. He's on the way.
Oh. That goalie's doing nothing.
Foul. That must be a red card. Can he stay on his feet? He's on his feet. He's nearly there. Yes. 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 It's an opportunity. Goal!
He's let himself down, and he's let the team down, hasn't he, John?
I somehow don't think the Brazilian soccer team is worried that much right now. But to be fair, though, right, these are all college teams with limited budgets using somewhat, toy hardware, right? Believe it or not, though, in the past 3 years, robotics have really hit a tipping point, and they're really starting to come mainstream. Here's one of them. Remember Rosie the robot, right? Well, here's an early instantiation of it. This is Ida, right? This is a real thing. You can actually buy or pre-order right now, right? $1,500 you can buy an Ida. And they have an awesome video. It's 5 minutes long, so I didn't want to play it for you here, but it's fantastic. This thing, look at all the stuff it says it can do. And in this picture, you see it, it's actually playing hide and seek with a little boy. It's fantastic. It's beautiful, right? Now, is it being over-marketed? Of course. I mean, look, handyman, it's got no arms. It's ridiculous, right? It can't do stairs, right? However, what they're really pulling at is this whole concept of these are digital pets. These are helpers. These are human aides or companions, right? Really trying to replace the dog, if you will. And if you think I'm far-fetched, check this out. That's not a robot. That's a hot water heater. But that kid loves it. There are dogs and cats in a meeting right now trying to figure out how to deal with the robot threat. All right. And then, of course, if you really want to get serious, you go to the industrial base, right? And there are some amazing things here. We already talked about autonomous vehicles. They're ready now. As soon as the legal framework's in place, they're ready now. Boston Dynamics is by far the leading forefront of this whole thing. If you look at a video of the mule, I think it's got a new name now, but if you look at a video of it long enough, you forget it's a machine and you start thinking that you're looking at some headless cow just roaming around the pasture, right? And even when you start getting to human robotics, there are some amazing, amazing improvements that have made. And here's one example. Meet Handle, once again from Boston Dynamics. Look what this thing can do. And let's compare it to the soccer robot. You'll notice, by the way, this thing is over 6 feet tall, right? So it's not a small thing. Who has any doubts something like that is not going to be on the battlefield in 15 years from now? I mean, think of all the things You have a doubt? You don't think it's going to be on there? Oh, well, sure. Well, now you're getting multi-domain on me, but we haven't invented that one yet, right? Think of all the jobs this thing can do. Just today, just what you've seen, right? My favorite is security guard, right? Could you imagine? It's just packed up right there, right? Some burglar walks in the factory. The thing just springs open, starts doing that backwards ice skating thing. That's all he would have to do. He wouldn't have to do anything else. The guy would just surrender right there, right? Look, I'll make it scarier. There. If HP were here, they deserved everything. They deserved. Right? This is the future of warfare. There's no doubt about it in my mind. Right? And if we're not going to be first, somebody else will. Right? So, this leads me all to my 3 fundamental laws of the future. Right? Because why should Newton have all the fun? Number 1, hardware will continue to become increasingly more capable, and software is going to be dictating all its function. The Moto Z, you can buy this today. This is an actual cell phone, right? Is a great example of that, right? So here you have a cell phone that actually provides you an open backplane infrastructure to add new stuff, right? And you can buy modules that are already made. That one you see there with the 2 little lights, that's actually a projector, right? So you can hook a projector to your phone and play movies in your hotel room, right? There are others, right? There's a battery. I think there's a much better camera that you can attach. But then they also provide you a breadboard that anybody, any third-party developer can develop their own attachments and have full access to the backplane and front end of the phone and build your own apps, right? And this trend is going to include robotics, right? You're going to have this, the hardware in robotics, there's not a lot of super innovation there. It's all about the software and getting that thing to be able to do amazing things based on the sensors that it has available. Law number 2, complexity of the software is going to constantly go up. If you look, right, a Boeing 787 had, what, 12 million lines of code, Windows XP about 40 million. In 2016, Ford proudly announced that their new F-150 had 150 million lines of code. What's that? Well, I agree with you. I cannot imagine how this needs more software than the space shuttle, but it has a lot more of it. The only reason I can come up with, it's secretly a transformer. It's the only logical reason of why it needs 150 million lines of code. You know, that's it. And last but not least, security will always be a problem. I understand I'm a bit biased here. It kind of means job security for me. But it's true. If you ever think there's going to be a time where we're going to have computer security licked, I think you're mistaken, right? It's just going to change. It's going to morph. There's going to be new attack vectors that we haven't even thought of, right? In 2030, there's going to be a reporter somewhere interviewing some guy at an ER, and the story's going to be like, well, I don't know what happened. Somebody hacked Tom the tomato plant. It got into my fridge. The thing started ordering milk by the caseload, and I tried to stop it, and next thing you know, my Ado the robot tried to kill me. And now, here I am in the ER, broken, bleeding. Right? Now, it sounds facetious, but believe it or not, there was a story. I didn't have a chance to put it in the briefing. There was a story in the USA Today just a week ago. You remember those Roomba the robots that we all think are so cute? Well, guess what? The new versions have a camera. And they record your entire house. And Zumba was looking at selling maps of blueprints of your house, right? With your permission, of course. But regardless, even if you say no, there's a photograph map of your house in that robot. Guys, no, for all you could be naked in the shower and the little Zumba is running around, right? So attack vectors we never even imagined are going to be possible. And then here's another interesting phenomenon, right, related to the IoT stuff, right? If you think about it historically, the lifespan of your hardware and your software were pretty much in sync, right? If you think of your laptop, 3-5 years, right? Your phone, we change your phone once every 1 year to 18 months, right? How often do you change your fridge? Right? When it breaks? 20 years? But now you're going to have this piece of software embedded into it the company can probably go belly up 20 times over by then, right? It's not going to be maintained. So there's actually a name for this. They call it zombie software. Software that should have been long dead but is still alive because it's embedded in a piece of hardware that has still life in it, right? Here's an example for you. You may not know, but your ATM behind that simple little facade runs Windows XP. 95% of all the ATMs in the United States run Windows XP. Guess what happened last year? Microsoft stopped supporting Windows XP, right? So there are a whole bunch of banks right now trying to figure out what the hell do I do with every single ATM that's out there that's running Windows XP. And if you think about it, there was no reason for it, right? This goes back to your point about software bloat. An ATM is a simple machine, right? It dispenses cash. It gives you your balance. You could easily do that in an embedded processor without any operating system. But this makes it so much faster, right? Because it does everything for you, and all you got to do is build a simple little application on top of it. All right? So to deal with these laws, if you will, we're going to have to change the way we... So this is where I get into... I've got 3 slides left, and then we'll open up to questions. Where I get a little preachy, if you will, of some of the things we have to change in the way we do business in the Army. And once again, just my opinion. Right? Number 1, we perhaps should really relook at how we do acquisition. I know you heard it before, it's not fast enough, but actually I think it's more fundamental than that. This stovepipe approach of building one thing to do one function was good 20, 30 years ago, right? I showed you the chart, right? A camera was a camera. A radio was a radio. An EW system was an EW system. That is not true anymore, right? You'll notice they all have common components, right? Today's hardware can do any of those functions purely by software programmatic. So does it make sense to still have these fully stovepiped, cradle to grave, I own the hardware, I own the software, I own every single nut and bolt of that system within our PM structure? Or would it make more sense to say, you know what, maybe we need a PM generic software-defined radio platform, and then everybody else is an application on top of that, much like your cell phone is today, right? You may have to add a couple of pieces of hardware, right? Maybe a couple of cards, maybe you're gonna gotta add an antenna, an amplifier, but you're all starting from the same hardware baseline, right? To me, that makes sense, right? We could do the same thing in our software, right? You could have a generic operating environment, if you will, a generic data management system, and applications run on top of that. As opposed to, once again, I own the whole darn thing. Right? It's not going to happen overnight, but it's something we should at least be discussing. Right? So, let's bring it home. There are many technologies, I named just 3, that are really going to revolutionize not just the military, right? But just all aspects of life. There are huge implications with jobs and social issues of what this technology, you know, autonomous vehicles will displace 18 million jobs, right? Now, the Army doesn't really care too much, but even the Army is going to get hit by some of these. Think of things like moral and legal, right? You have an autonomous convoy driving around the battlefield. Little kid crosses the road. What does your autonomous convoy do? Do you run off the road and potentially stop your mission? Or do you run the kid over? I have no answer to that. The civilian guys are going to try to come up with their solutions, but it's probably going to be different than what we want it to be, depending on the situation. Right? Somebody's going to have to deal with that. But it's definitely going to change the way we fight. Right? So let's bring it full circle. My original picture. Now, this picture was actually wrong, right? Based on everything we said today, it should look more like that, right? 70-to-1 ratio in size, right? Also, here's a big one. The fight here is clearly regional, right? You're in an adversary territory. You kind of know who your enemy is, hopefully, right? Somebody you can see and shoot at. Here, it's global. The person you're fighting here may not be the same person you're fighting here, right? If you were at the previous briefing in this room, or was it that room, whatever, on the Russia stuff, right? There is no reason why, while we're in the middle of a conflict, another nation could not try to engage us within this space and hide under the constant batter of non-attribution, right? So This is fundamentally different for us because we're not used to fighting this way. We're used to, what's the threat? Model against my threat. What can they do? These guys are not very technically savvy. It's irrelevant. Who you're fighting here could be totally different. You have to almost prepare for the worst. And last but not least, robots, right? Once again, in general term, this is purely the embodiment of multi-domain battle in my perspective, right? This is the target that you can engage either way. You can shoot at it, sure, it's going to be effective, right? Or you could electron it somehow, right? And by the way, I know we talk about third offsets, right, and how this is potentially a third offset. I actually disagree. Once again, I definitely believe it's going to revolutionize warfare. But the problem, the reason why I don't think it's an offset is because we are not alone. We are not the only ones that have it, which is one of the fundamental definitions of an offset, right? Here is South Korea. They have this ginormous looking thing modeled after the Avatar movie, right? When you think of Japan, you think of this cute little guy, right? The little Osmo Honda thing. Well, they also have this nightmare. It works. It moves, it punches things, right? And then, of course, I'm sure everybody's seen the little Russian video, the guy shooting a gun, right? This technology is not driven by governments. It is driven by the commercial sector, and as such, it's out there, right? So it is not really an offset as much as it is a race that we're going to have to deal with. And I believe that was my last slide. So I'll be happy to take some questions from you. So I'm glad you asked that question. I didn't plant it. So you want to know my answer? Here's my easy answer. We're going to do it as soon as the other guy does it first. Right? The United States is probably not going to be the first one to do that. The moment the other guy does it, we're going to do it too. There's my answer for you.
When you look back at your earlier slide that showed the exponential growth across really the user instance.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw initially in the 70s, 80s, the high spikes. That was all geared towards infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have the infrastructure to support what we wanted to do, and so we had to build it. So as we built that infrastructure, then the infrastructure matured.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what your argument, I believe, is about. We are still building software like tanks. That's basically what it boils down to.
We're still building systems as if they're unifunctional.
Exactly.
Right?
So now industry, this is one thing that all this, we support all the services now in a couple of ways, but the point being is it's all the services have the same issue, and it goes back to what we said about the acquisition piece. I've had 4 or 5 discussions this morning about this on the acquisition side. How do you get a bureaucratic, because that's what we are, we're a bureaucracy, not military.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make them understand that the only way to innovate is to see and understand how industry can build and change? Now, JSID is not going to go away, and me and
Right,
you and I
right.
have fought that fight for a long time. So we have to figure something else out. Because now, you're right, our hardware now has matured.
Right.
Our hardware is mature. So you look at a crew box out there on a home beat, and you look at that antenna.
Yeah.
That antenna is only being used for what you think.
So
it could be for more.
I agree with you, Mac, but I want to make sure these are 2 different problems, right? You've got the speed problem, right? That is one we have to deal with. But then you also have an efficiencies problem, and that's the one I was mentioning, right? And the fact that each PM that's building a radio, I'm building an EW system, but building a system, because they own the whole chain, chances are that they're reinventing the wheel at the fundamental hardware level, right? So it's an efficiencies problem. Now, I think the 2 kind of go hand in hand, right? By solving the efficiencies problem, I might actually also help the speed problem a little bit, right? I can still do that within JSIDs. I can still say, you know what, I have a PM software-defined radio. You're going to have to figure out, I guess, new metrics and new measures of success, right? Because this guy is providing a middle service almost, if you will, not necessarily a direct warfighting capability. So that's a totally different model, but it just makes sense in today's technological environment, at least from my perspective. Anyway.
So as the hardware is matured, I go back to our software is not mature. Even though we buy new apps every day, gotcha. Those apps, when you go back and look at the basic way that an application is built, developed, tested, and put out into the market, we have not changed to the understanding of the next algorithm that will jump us past our current software. We are actually almost an
From what perspective?
From the perspective of the engineering side of the house, to get it to the point where I can take, so I build this mature infrastructure, now that has matured again. So that's what I'm saying right now, software is kind of continued to climb, hardware is kind of stopped, and we're starting to use that now. We're taking legacy systems and make them multifaceted, right? Get the software platform though, the software is kind of doing the same thing. It's getting to a point where you're going to see what I believe is a significant jump in the next generation, if you would, of software that can kind of make that gap much smaller. I think right now there's a large gap in there. I think it goes again to we kind of matured our infrastructure. We're still building hardware, but we're really concentrating only on the software that will ride currently.
Right.
It's the next software
No.
that will really make the robotics piece that you're seeing, those
So-
will become the norm.
I agree, but the young lady is absolutely right? There's no reason for a Ford F-150 to have 100 million lines of code. The only reason why it does is because they keep building on top of software infrastructures, right? I'll just build on top of that operating system. I'll build a wrapper on top of that and the middleware on top of that. And next thing you know, you got 150 million lines of code. So that is one way to go. That's the way commercial sector likes to go because it's speed to market, right? I could build an app in half a day doing it that way, right? I can get an ATM machine out really fast doing it that way. But if they would have just spent the time and built that functionality and just right into hardware, it would have done everything they needed it to do, right? So how we develop software is a trade-off between expedience and convenience versus actual software engineering. Sir?
I just want to add one major innovation coming along is actually related to hardware, especially cybersecurity. Quantum technology that's going to change the entire field of cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Completely powerful. The only thing I wanted to bring that up is to actually use hardware that's forcing the photon. It's going to revolutionize the entire cybersecurity.
Okay. I'll have to add it to the list. Absolutely. Sir?
With respect to the Internet of Things, we're basically grounding ourselves in a cloud sensor. So, I mean, if you think about it, our house is a sensor, our vehicles, our devices, our clothes, perhaps even our bodies. So, I guess that leads me to think that individual privacy will cease to exist. And also, when you're looking at privacy and things that need to be protected, like reference information, how do you create a skill in essence when you're surrounded by sensors?
That is absolutely true. I agree with you. I think privacy is already half dead, if not almost all the way in the grave. And it's only going to get worse. And the thing is, though, here's the problem, right? Remember those after Googlers? I'm not sure they care, right? They're the first ones to post on Facebook where the heck they're at every time of the day. And, you know, I'm not sure they really care as much as we do about privacy. I think they're pretty comfortable with the fact that their friends know what they're doing at all times, right? And as such, there hasn't been a lot of pushback with that. And you're absolutely right. Another story in the USA Today, a company in Minnesota, half their workforce agreed to get an RFID implant, right, to access their computer system, right? It's coming. It's coming. So it's going to be an interesting thing. I completely agree. In a world where everybody has a smartphone, how can you possibly assume you're going to have any type of operational security on the battlefield? I don't think it's achievable unless you're invisible, right? So we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to change the way we fight, knowing that that's not going to be there. Yeah. Yeah. So, you're right. You're absolutely right. I think the next skiff is basically not going to have to worry about things coming in. It's going to have to worry about just build a giant Faraday cage and, you know, you walk in and nothing comes out kind of thing. Because you're right. It's getting harder and harder to buy. I think our IT department buys laptops and has to physically remove the camera, right, and the Wi-Fi chip because you can't buy them without them anymore. Sir?
Sergio, you're right. We talked about the trends in technology in the future. Can you speak to us at all about your insights on any kind of international forums that would provide any kind of ethical governance on what we see in the future?
I don't think we're there yet. I haven't heard too many. I know the discussion of, specifically when it comes to economics, right? The potential impact of job loss due to automation and AI has come to the forefront now. But I'm not sure there's a lot of work, internationally or otherwise, being done to really address some of these things. Here's one that, if anybody asks me what keeps me up at night, here's one that I would be worried about as an operator. Without getting too dark here, right? Suicide bombers. It's very difficult to defend against a suicide bomber because that person is willing to pretty much kill themselves to kill others, right? The thing we got going for us against a suicide bomber is it takes a special individual to want to be willing to do that, right? Not everybody is clamoring to go blow themselves up. How do you do that in a world where you can tell your vehicle to drive anywhere all by itself, right? If I can get into my car and say, go here, and then get out, and it gets there all by itself, that same situation is expanded a lot, right? I mean, so now all of a sudden you got autonomous vehicles driving around anywhere, and you have no clue which one could potentially be a device that could blow you up, right? So how do we deal with that? I'm not sure that's a technical solution, right? I think that's more of a governance one, right? Somebody should be talking to the autonomous industry and say, hey, how does the police cordon off an area so that it's guaranteed that no autonomous vehicle can ever get in there, right, by law? There's got to be, this is where our legal framework hasn't grown up to that, right? But that to me is a huge issue, right? Because we're not even talking hacking here. We're just talking telling it to go from point A to point B. Sir?
What do you think the greatest existential threat to the U.S. is from a cyber-enabled activity?
Cyber-enabled? I'm not big on doomsday scenarios, but the critical infrastructure still is a huge problem, right? I mean, that is a huge problem. I'm not sure we are doing as much as we should be of protecting it. And once again, I think a lot of it is more policy-based than technology-based. The big giant denial of service attack that happened, I don't know, 6 months ago from all the remote wireless cameras from China, right? That wasn't revolutionary, right? I mean, it was a default root password that was never changed. Oh, and by the way, you couldn't change it. It was hard-coded in there, and you couldn't change it even if you wanted to, right? So not dealing with those things, right? When you're talking 600 billion things out there, if you don't start enforcing some policies within that infrastructure, I think it's going to be very difficult to defeat. So, like I said, I don't like to predict, you know, cyber 9/11s or Pearl Harbors, but something is eventually going to happen. Something's going to break. Something's going to go down. It might not even be done by a third-party state actor. It could be some kid in the basement that just punches their own keystrokes, and it's going to have repercussions, and we're going to have to deal with it. How are we doing on time? Well, I still got 5 minutes. Yeah.
So, given the amount of sensing that autonomous vehicles, maybe less extent robotics will need, can you talk a little bit more about some of what you see as the attack vectors, the attack surface?
Yeah. So I got to be careful to stay unclassified here, right? But believe it or not, a robot. So let's pick autonomous vehicles, right? There's not that much, right? There's only a couple of ways to get in there, right? Assuming we're not talking about actually having physical access that you can plug something in, right? Remotely. Basically, you're going to have a vehicle-to-vehicle communication network. That's going to be there. They're going to be reliant on GPS to some extent. That's going to be there. They're going to have some sort of remote monitoring. Think OnStar, right, for the cloud. And then last but not least, all of them use LiDAR to do their sensing, right? And maybe a couple other things, yes. Remote updates. That's going to come in through the OnStar kind of backhaul thing.
Right, so this all assuming some sort of infrastructure, right?
And,
We're going to be imagine infrastructure going. When you have in that chart with the AI, the true AI, right, was that essentially what you're talking about, Thomas? Was the
they're still going to have connectivity, right? They're still going to have sensors that are going to be based on cyber attackable things, right? They're still going to rely on stereoptic vision, on some sort of sensing environment, whether it's radar, LiDAR. They're still going to have comms, right? They're going to want to talk to each other somehow. So there are still going to be RF or optically enabled sensors and communications within these platforms, no matter how autonomous they are.
Well, you can still have certain functionalities that are still beyond without being connected to the infrastructure.
You're absolutely right. I'm not saying that they have to talk. I don't have to talk and still move, right? However, going to the gentleman's point, I would focus on the sensing, right? If I could figure out a way to blind LiDAR, right, that would probably be a good thing, right? Because it's hard for them to move if they can't see, right? So there are ways, but are they going to use LiDAR in 15 years from now? I don't know. I would guess yes, but whatever it is, it's figuring out how to attack the sensors and the communication infrastructure that they're going to possess. And it's going to be there. I don't care how advanced they are. It's going to be there, right? Even if they don't use it, unless they completely turn the radio off, they're going to have connectivity.
One last question on AI. So right now the way we do AI typically is you have to train.
Right.
You have to train it to think, if you would. So human rights algorithms, we put it into the system, it tells it what to do. We also give it left and right limits as to how it will grow and function on its own.
Right.
So what do you see really, or I go back to my comment earlier about the next processing capability. What is in your vision? When will we see that true ability to see an AI that can learn, function, and then retrain?
Yeah, honestly, I'm a skeptic. Notice in my Z chart, it was way down at the bottom in the 2040s, 2050s, right? I don't think we're there yet. I think what we're calling AI now, deep learning stuff, all incredibly impressive, but it's really not intelligence, right? It's really just another search algorithm through training data sets. There's no magic there. I'm not even sure we're going to truly be able to do it, right? I mean, we really got to get to a point where we have, I really think it takes an autonomous entity, I really think the only way to truly do it, you almost have to think about a little kid, right? It's this thing that can interact with its environment and making a couple of mistakes here and there over time, potentially a long period of time, figure out what it's going to do, right? I think that's the only way to truly do it. I mean, because you're right, you're never going to have all the training sets, right? You're going to come up with something new. You're going to have to be able to, I think the next big leap is extrapolation, right? So I trained you on this data set. You can find cats in a picture, right? If I could describe to you what a dog looks like, would you be able to pick out a dog without me having to retrain you just because of the fact that you can detect a cat? If we can figure out how to do that, that would be a huge leap forward.
I'm kind of curious what your take on the singularity.
Oh, Ray Kroll's writer, singularity. So I actually believe it will happen. I don't believe his time frame. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. But I didn't want to get into the metaphysical in my discussion. But I do absolutely believe, to the chagrin of my wife, that the Borg are in our future as humanity. I'm telling you, I believe it. I believe it. The moment somebody figures out, that this prosthetic makes me better than if I didn't have this prosthetic, people are going to want it, right? The moment imagine somebody can put a chip in your brain that gives you total memory recall. That'd be awesome, right? I would totally sign up for that. And if you don't, you're going to be left behind. So I'm not saying you're going to lose individuality, but I think humanity 50 years from now might look a little different than you expected. So I do believe Ray is on the right path there. I mean, I think we're still far off, but I do believe that could happen.
Do you think, though, that it's sometimes we underappreciate the exponential fact? In Kurzweil, for example, talks a lot about acceleration,
Yeah.
So, you think we think in terms of the time scale.
I told you I love exponential. You're preaching to the choir. I agree. I could be I could be wrong.
Before Facebook just had tools
Yeah.
to talk, learn how to talk, or develop their own language, or whatever. They did that in a couple hours.
Yeah. Listen, we are horrific as a human race to predict the future. Some things that we get right. Sometimes we predict things that are going to happen way too late and they happen early, and sometimes we pick things that are going to happen early and they happen way too late. What's the guy's name? He's always on TV. Black physicist. Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? He was giving a story on how when he was growing up, he was watching Star Trek, right? And out of all the amazing technology in Star Trek, the one that he thought was unbelievable was the swooshing of the doors when you walk in front of them, that they open. I was like, we're never going to have that, all right? And then, I'm going to date myself now, but I used to watch a show back in the 70s, 80s called Space, 1999, right, where we had a moon base and all sorts of crazy stuff. Obviously, that didn't happen, right? So, like I said, hey, if Ray's right, that's fantastic. I got to live forever, right? That's awesome. But like I said, I'm thinking his time frame is a little bit optimistic. But who knows? You know, we've mapped the genome. The next 30 years should be a heck of a wild ride. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Oh, good. I try not to make everybody sleep.
Last year, when I heard your question, I called up Scott Long and said, I want him in Delaware.
Okay.
And this presentation, I think, has the place for it.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be happy to.
I'm talking with General Motors, Morrison on Tuesday, and if we could find a time slot, you wouldn't have to say, hey,
I could shorten it up if you wanted to a little bit. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just absolutely on.
Great, great. Thank you.
Shoot a note to
All right, please. I'll be happy. Oh, okay.
The one I thought was interesting, and it looks like it's here, is automatic storage translator.
Oh, yeah.
I read that an Aussie firm had put together one that doesn't use Bluetooth, doesn't use the internet. It puts on your head, and goes speech to text.
But, that's coming.
Apparently 6 languages already.
Yeah, yeah. I believe it. I believe it.
Not, it doesn't speak.
No. But
You speak to me.
yeah. I agree. That's coming. Google Translate is 95% accurate nowadays, right?
And this even gets various versions of Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to steal you.
Oh, the dialects and stuff?